Hello and welcome to my shop. A while back I did a video where I took some strips of construction paper and I attempted to treat them like veneer. I cut a blank in half and I glued those 3 sheets of construction paper inside of the blank, and then I attempted to turn it. I never got that far. When I went to drill the holes for the tubes, the wood split apart, and it finally hit me that this is what turners do when they do inside out turning. They use paper to glue 2 blanks together, turn the inside, then they can easily split it apart, turn it around, and turn the outside. That video, even though it was a fail, I posted it and I got a lot of positive feedback on it, a lot of comments, and I still get asked about it today if I've tried anything different. And I've got 2 things I want to try. And we're going to start this today as a project. I'm going to take some wood hardener and I'm going to soak some strips of paper in wood hardener, hang them up to dry, and I've got some Elmer's glue. I'm going to paint some strips with Elmer's glue and saturate them as well as I can. We're going to let them dry. Hopefully once the paper has dried with one or both of these products on it, we'll be able to take those strips and laminate them between 2 pieces of wood. So regardless of whether this works or it doesn't work, we're going to attempt it and we're going to show the results. I'm going to test the Minwax wood hardener first. So I just put a little cardboard down to kind of protect my table. I've got this nice little tray. Over here I've cut a number of strips of colored paper. Each of these little stacks is red, yellow, and green. I'm going to separate these and dip each piece individually into the wood hardener. We're going to get it wet, and then we're going to take it over here to my temporary drying station. I'll hang it with these clothespins. I've got some cardboard here to protect the floor and all the tools below it, and we'll just let the individual strips of paper hang here until they're completely dry. Everything you see before you has been dipped in Minwax wood hardener. There are enough pieces of paper here to do 3 complete blanks. What the plan is to do these exactly like we did the first time around. I'll do a random squiggly cut down the center of a blank, separate it. I'll glue a red, green, and yellow strip of paper between the 2 pieces of wood. We'll flip it over, do the same style cut on the second side, and glue 3 sheets of paper in. We're going to keep these separate from the Elmer's glue blanks. That way we'll know which set performed the best and how each set did perform. The Minwax wood hardener, even though the paper still looks like it's damp, is completely dry on all of the papers. I'm going to go ahead and remove them from the line, and I'll lay them out separately. I won't lay them on top of one another, but I'll lay them out on another piece of cardboard. I've got a little container of water here, and I'm going to go ahead and put a liberal amount of glue in the water. We'll get it mixed up, and then we're going to brush it onto the paper. I don't really know exactly how much glue should be added. I'm adding enough to raise it. There's little marks on the side of this cup to raise it to twice the level that the water was. And if it's still too thin, if the consistency is still too thin, I'll come back and add some additional glue. Just test a little bit up here and see what it looks like. I don't know, it looks a little thin to me. I'm going to go ahead and put a little more glue in there. Thicken it up just a tiny bit. Let's give this a try. What I want to do is, these papers, if you take a look at a standard pen blank, they're a little longer than the pen blank. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paint this on almost up to the end, but I don't want to get all the way to the end because I'm afraid when I clip the clothespin on it that the glue will actually glue the clothespin closed. So what we're going to do is attempt to paint just up to this point here, and then we'll let it dry. This is a lot like a Mod Podge, I guess, so should do a pretty interesting job. All right, let's get this hung up. I've got all of the colored papers with the Elmer's glue and water mix painted up and drying. We'll let them completely dry, and then we'll pull them down and we'll get started making some blanks. I'm ready to begin my test. These blanks were soaked in wood hardener, these in watered down Elmer's glue. I've even gone ahead and marked the blanks to make it easier to keep everything in order. Off camera, I'm going to cut these blanks and get these pieces of paper glued in them. We'll come back when the glue is dry and we're at the point where we're ready to start drilling these blanks for tubes. I've made the first cut in each blank. I'm going to let the glue sufficiently dry, then we'll flip them over, make the cut on the second side, and we'll be ready to drill them for tubes. My blanks are finished. I've got the wood hardener on top, the Elmer's glue on the bottom. There is colored paper through both sides of the blank, and they have been drying for a very long time, so I feel really comfortable that they are ready to go. What I'm going to do, I never had trouble with cutting them, so off camera I'm going to go ahead and get them cut into normal size blanks. Then we'll come back and I'll set the camera up and we're going to drill them on camera because that's where we had our problem last time. They just split apart as soon as the drill attempted to go into the end of the blanks. As I mentioned a moment ago, drilling the blanks out is where they exploded on me during the last video. So this is going to be the crucial step. If they make it past this step, I'm fairly confident that they should turn just fine. We're going to go ahead and start with the wood hardener blanks, and let's get both of them drilled out. I am going to do this in real time as well. That way, if anything happens, you will be witness to it as I am. One blank, I saw a little wiggle. I thought it was there, but I believe it just was a vibration in my vise. So one down. What I'm doing is I'm turning the blanks because the paper sticking out kind of causes a little bit of an issue with getting a good clamp on it. Let me pull it back here for a second. Make sure it's straight up and down, and we'll go ahead and drill this one. My clamp wasn't completely tight, so I had a little bit of movement, and you can see what happened to me. The blank did not blow out, but I drilled out the side of it. I'm going to attempt to fix this. I'm going to flood this with CA glue and clamp it back together because, as you can see, we'll have plenty of the paper to turn. This was just because I probably did not have it clamped tight, so as I went down through there and it caught one of the cuts, it let the blank kind of move a little bit to the side. But I'm not going to call that a disaster yet. That's definitely fixable. Let's swap these out for the Elmer's glue blanks and see how they perform. Clean off our bit a little bit. first blank looks really good. What I'm checking for, I'm looking for the mark that denotes the middle of the blank. I always like to drill from the middle out. So I think we just got to make sure we line that up. This one ought to be interesting because we're starting right at a paper line. All right, you'll notice at the bottom we did have a little bit of blowout. And that was not caused by any slippage. On the first blank, I probably should have trimmed that paper off. Let me show you. See the extra paper? I probably should have trimmed that off so I could have got a tighter grip in the chuck properly. So that was my fault on that one. This one gave way a little bit. I'm going to go ahead and once again, I'll flood that with some thin CA, clamp it down, and I think we're going to be able to turn this. Before we go any further, I'd like to take a second and talk about both of these blanks. This is the first Elmer's glue blank, and it did not split out at either end. It held together really well. There are no splits along the paper lines where the paper was inserted between the two pieces of wood. The second Elmer's glue blank, I had a little bit of blowout at the end. Now that could have been my fault. I may have needed to clear the bit and didn't clear all of the chips out. And you know, if you get too many chips jammed in there, it can cause it to explode. I don't know. I do know that I cut this blank about a 1/4 inch too large. So most of that's going to disappear. But what I'm going to do here in a minute is I'm going to flood it with CA, wrap it with some wax paper, and squeeze it back together with a clamp. There were no splits along any of the seams where the paper was inserted between the blanks. So I'm very happy with that. Here's the first blank that I did, or was this the first or the second? This was the second blank that I drilled of the wood hardener. And it looks pretty good on the entry mark. I got off, this was my fault because I did not have it clamped tightly and the blank moved just a tiny bit. That is easily fixable with a little bit of CA and a clamp. So that's going to be fixed, no problem. Along the glue lines, it looks pretty darn good to me. I noticed something, and this is why I wanted to talk to you guys about this. Look at this. This nice little, you can see where the paper, let me get that as close as I can for you. See how you can see the fibers of the paper, how it pulled apart. Looks good on this side, and this side. And the entry hole and the exit hole were okay, but see how it's separated? I'm going to go ahead and flood that with some CA and squeeze that back together in hopes of salvaging this blank. But so far, I would have to say that the watered down Elmer's glue did a better job of saturating all of the fibers in the paper and solidifying that paper so that it held together. It was more like a piece of wood again as opposed to the wood hardener. We'll know more as we barrel trim these and as we turn them. We're going to start with the Elmer's glue blank. It was the one that split out. I noticed it split out a little bit on two sides. So what I'm going to do is use a small clamp because this is just loose and I'll be able to hold that in place. Then the larger clamp can come over top of it and squeeze together the side that appears to be a tiny bit more damaged. But the first thing I want to do is I want to flood this with some CA glue. Try not to get it all over my fingers. Okay. Okay, that side looks good. Now let's get it clamp from the other side. I need about 3 hands here. Okay, I feel pretty good about that. I'm going to put a little more CA in there just to make sure that it's soaked in really well. And we're going to set this aside to dry. I am not going to use accelerator. I'm going to give this, 15-20 minutes to dry to make sure it's good and dry. Then we'll come back and clean that hole up and get our tube glued into the blank. Here's the first wood hardener blank, and it blew out at the end. I'm going to do the same thing. I'm just going to basically flood it with some CA glue, and we're going to wrap it up with a little bit of paper. Ooh, I need to move a little quicker than this because that CA, I don't know how quickly it's going to set up. And then we'll just clamp it to squeeze it back together. Okay, that's good. And a little more CA glue. And let's set this one aside. For the second wood hardener blank, this is the one where the paper separated. You can see the fibers. I'm going to go ahead and put some CA glue in there. And I've got a larger clamp, so hopefully I can get a little more surface area and clamp this together. But before I do anything, I'm going to clean this paper off here because this is what I think caused me problems with the first blank. And that'll let me get a good surface area to squeeze that together as tightly as possible. I just used a chisel and it cleaned up very nicely. The paper just peeled right off. What I'm going to do is go ahead and get it wrapped in a little bit of wax paper to protect my clamp. And I'm going to go ahead and get it in the clamp, but I'm not going to put any pressure on it, just enough to hold it steady. Now I'm going to go ahead and hit it with the CA glue. And let's crank it down and see if we can draw it together. Okay. I drew it together a little bit, but it still has a ways to go. What I'll do with this one is, as I turn it, I will be sure to fill that with CA so that we can keep this together. I think we're going to be able to pull this one out of the fire. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and let all of the blanks set for about 10-15 minutes. Make sure the CA is dry. I'll test it to make sure it's not tacky. And then we're going to come back and we're going to get our tubes. Well, actually, I'll glue the tubes into the blanks off camera. We'll come back and barrel trim these blanks on camera. And probably instead of barrel trimming, because of the delicate nature, I think I will probably take them to my sander. And I have a jig on the sander that will let me square the edges of the blanks. I'm over at my belt sander, and I've got a jig here. It's a pin tube squaring jig for the sander that Robert Montgomery made for me. And this thing is fantastic. I still barrel trim quite often, but when I have materials like spalted maple that is sometimes punky and soft, this is absolutely fantastic for squaring up the tubes. It's got a 1/4 inch shaft on it. You just slide your pin blank on here, put it in the slot, turn it on, and you can move it back and forth and rotate the blank and sand it perfectly right down to the tube. You can see that tube is just barely below the surface. So let's give this a try. And now you can see that the tube is right out to the edge of the blank. It's perfectly squared and ready for the lathe. I'm going to go ahead and shut the camera off and do the other 3 blanks as well as the back side of this blank, and we'll come back when we're ready to start turning on the lathe. I've got the wood hardener blank chucked up, and I'm not going to turn this on camera. Pretty well turning is turning. I'm going to go ahead and shut the camera down, and when this is finally shaped, I'll come back and show it to you before I start sanding. And if I have any issue at all, anything comes apart, blows out, anything, I will come back and show it to you. I'm not quite finished turning, but I came back to show you this blank for a reason. This is the wood hardener blank, and the back blank I drilled from the center out, and it's the one that went off center a little bit, and I had to fill or glue the end of the blank back together, and it's looking good. I was able to trim a lot of that off because I'd made the blank a little longer than it needed to be. It's still got a flat spot on it, but I've got plenty of meat there. That should clean right up. What my concern is the front blank. This one had the split in it, and the split must have been pretty much on the surface only because it looks great as you get into the blank. But right here's a problem. There was a knot, and that knot, a little chunk of it came out. What I'm going to do is take my parting tool, and I'm going to come in just behind, this is hard to do with the camera, just behind the knot and trim that off. That's about 1/4 inch. I'll go to the sander and I'll sand that tube back flush, put it back on the lathe, finish turning it, and what I'll do is add a second chrome ring to this blank to take it back to the length it needs to be. I think that's going to be the best fix because I really I really look at that to be problematic if I don't get rid of it completely. You can see now that I have the bad area removed. I just need to clean the tube up, get it back on the lathe, and we're back in business. Got the pin turned down, and it looks really good. I love the different accents, the red, green, yellow accents. Down here toward the bottom, that's where it curved over at, and we really got into the red paper. It's kind of interesting looking though. I may, since this is a slimline, I can flip that. I may move that up to the center of the pin, or if I don't like it after I finish it, I may make that the top of the pin, and this could be the nib end down here. We'll just take a look at that. Then we could cover that with the clip a little bit, but we'll take a look at that when we get to that point. What I'm going to do now is sand this blank down and get some finish on it. The blank has been sanded down to 600, and it has been cleaned with denatured alcohol. I really like what I'm seeing. The only thing I don't like is right here. I do not like that. It's solid. It's not loose or flaky or anything. It's solid, but I just don't like the look of it. So I believe I'm going to make this the cap of the pin, this the nib, and I'll cover that with the majority of that with the clip. Because beyond that, and I'll try to get you a close-up once I get this assembled, but it's really neat how you can see the red, yellow, and green colors of the construction paper in there. It makes for a really neat effect. So I'm going to go ahead and get this finished, polished up, and we'll get the other one turned for you. Here's a close-up of the blank finished. This was the one made with the paper from the wood hardener. I think it's really, look at that effect. That is really cool, the different colors. It turned out wonderful. I'm going to go get this pressed into a pin kit, and then we're going to turn the Elmer's glue blank, and we'll compare the two of them and see what they look like. I've got the Elmer's glue blank chucked up, ready to turn. I'm really not expecting any problems out of this blank. I think it's going to go pretty smooth. I'll come back and show you what it looks like right before I start sanding and finishing. Here's kind of a close-up of the blank, so let me cover up the light a little bit so it's not too bright. Check that out right there. Is that cool? The effect that we got from the red, green, yellow. That's just really, it almost looks neon fluorescent. That is just amazing. Got the same effect in the front blank. There it is right there coming around. See that? Really a cool looking blank. I really like how that turned out. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get some CA on here, and we'll come back and see what she looks like. Here's a close-up of the Elmer's glue pin blank. It's not 100% finished. I still need to micro mesh and polish, but it turned out so amazing. I couldn't resist showing it. So I'm going to go ahead, shut the camera off. We'll get it micro meshed, polished. I'll get it pressed into a pin kit, and I'll come back and show you both of them side by side and give you my closing thoughts. Here are my finished pins. The top one is the wood hardener, and you can tell because it's a tiny bit shorter than the other pin. I think it's really beautiful. Take a look at all the colors shining through. Flip it around so you can see the back half. That red part I hid up under the clip, and you pretty well can't see it. It just was not very attractive as far as I was concerned. Here is the Elmer's glue pin. Take a look at that. Is that sweet or what? I just think it's absolutely beautiful the way those colors shine through. And look at that. I'd like to thank you for hanging out with me tonight in the shop while I just goofed around with this little experiment. But most of all, I would like to thank you because you guys watched the first video and you encouraged me. You gave me ideas. You kept saying, you can figure this out. I know you can get this. And that is what drove me to do it. I knew I had to figure out how to do these construction paper blanks. These two products came to mind. I think the wood hardener was suggested, and I think someone, I need to check the comments, may have suggested a Mod Podge, which really is the same thing I think as white Elmer's glue, white Elmer's school glue, and water. Both performed very well. The blowouts on the wood hardener blank, that was my fault. The blowout on the Elmer's glue blank, I'm going to take credit for that one too, because I'm afraid I may not have cleared the flights. Normally I clear the flights of the drill bit very often as I'm drilling, and I did not do that probably as often as I should. And if it builds up, around the bit, it can heat up and cause the blank to explode. So, and both of those blanks that had the little blowouts, they were minor, and they were at the end of the blank, and pretty well I trimmed them off after I fixed them. I really none of it was left. So for that, I'm very happy. Of the two products, picking one that performed better, I really can't. Both performed exceptionally well. The blank that split on the wood hardener, it was only surface. It must have been something to do with moisture, and it just dried and split a little bit, or maybe I clamped it too tight on the opposite side and it pulled apart and I just didn't see it. But once I got past, I thought I would add CA as I turned it. Once I got just below the surface and got the blank trued up, it completely disappeared. I would have to say, if I had to choose between the two products, I probably would choose the Elmer's glue. The main reason why is probably most of you have it in your house already. If you don't have it, it is extremely cheap. I think Elmer's glue is about $50 a bottle versus the wood hardener, which is about 10 bucks a bottle, and sometimes a little harder to come by. They both worked well, and I encourage you to try this on your own. I am going to wait. I've got the 4 other blanks. I thought I was going to go ahead and work on those, but I think I'm going to try to get a couple other sheets, maybe 2 or 3 different colors, and put 5 or 6 pieces of construction paper together, because I really like how these turned out. And I know they're hard to see in this particular light, but you saw them earlier on the table and on the lathe, and the colors just pop, and I love it. So I've talked long enough. I want to thank you for hanging out with me. I want you to know that you are always welcome in my shop. Come back and see me again real soon. Take care, everybody.